This is Masahiro Kajihara, and you are listening to Pixelated Audio Episode 66.
Welcome back. This is Pixelated Audio, a bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast. I'm Brian, and this is James.
Hey.
And today we're going to be spotlighting the music from a title that should bring back all these childhood memories.
What?
Yeah. No? It's called Hole Chaser on the PC-8801. And we've got some excellent music lined up that should be a lot of fun to go through and kind of listen to the soundtrack together.
Oh, totally. And because the PC-88 had varying hardware configurations, the music was written for both the YM2203 OPN and the YM2608 OPNA sound chips.
Yep, depending on the model or the configuration, of course.
Yeah, and the track that brought us in was the title theme from the OPNA version of Hole Chaser, composed by Masahiro Kajihara.
This is a pretty awesome track. It sounds like it was composed by the Cars.
Yeah. I thought it was... to me, it kind of felt like it could be the credits to like a TV sitcom, like a fun like kind of kids show or something like that. Oh, we chased some holes today.
No, I like the scales in the background. They kind of get overshadowed a little bit, but if you pay close attention, you can kind of make them out. And I think that adds a little bit more bounciness to the track.
Yeah, I definitely had that bouncy feel. And I thought it was a nice change of pace than like the last couple episodes we did, where they were very kind of dark and menacing and kind of scary sounding. So this was very fun and bouncy and lively and felt kind of bright. Which I think is an interesting combination for this game that we'll get into a little bit.
Yeah, this I think what makes this track so kind of awesome to listen to is the fact that the OPNA has such an incredible percussion rhythm section.
Right.
And being able to get those really poppy drums, they just sound so clean, and I think it adds to the overall soundtrack and a lot of other soundtracks on the system.
Yeah, it's not that the OPN is bad, but the OPNA just always has like this extra layer of just like awesomeness to it, just clean, very clean sounding.
Right, it's one of our babies.
Yeah.
All right, so Hole Chaser is kind of in an odd category. It's really just like the simplistic arcade puzzle game, but it has like an adult narrative kind of wrapped around it. And you guessed it, released only in Japan.
Yeah, no surprise here.
Yeah.
It was developed by Ryokusui Software and published by Birdie Soft in April of 1990 for the PC-8801 family of home computers.
Yeah, we don't know much about Birdie Soft. It was a small company founded by a few ex-Telenet employees, and it didn't last very long. But Ryokusui Software also didn't have a whole lot of information kind of floating around online and stuff. But it's a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, they were a doujin group that formed sometime around 1988 or 89. And really, this was primarily a group of amateur composers, which some of them also happen to be hobbyist engineers.
Right. They're mostly well-known, I think, today. If you're, a big chiptune fan, if you're into this style of music, and especially if you're in the chiptune community in Japan, for a disc volume that they did, a music disc volume. It was called Ryokusui Sound Team Music Disc, and they did 1 through 12 of this kind of series of music discs. And they started making these in 1989. Their first one was released, and they would, put some out every, few months or half a year. And their last one, Volume 12, was released in 1994.
They also put together a few small games. There was Nukeru Master XX in 1989 and the updated version Pro 8.8K. There was also Poker Sisters and Mindstorm.
Yeah, now Ryokusui Software had some really, really talented musicians and also brought in a lot of guest artists like Kenichi Arakawa under the name Thomas Brown and Takahiro Yonemura under the name Kemul. Or Chemul.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to actually read that. But really, there were only, I believe, 3 main staff members of Ryokusui Software. There was Normaster Taki and our composer Masahiro Kajihara that went by the alias Kaja or Kajapon. Kajihara is a Japanese composer from Kyushu, and we kind of like to classify him as one of the most, if not the most, important and influential audio engineer for the OPN family of sound chips.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first off, he's an extremely talented composer, working alongside some of the best FM chiptune artists of all time. And on top of that, he was also responsible for his widely used sound driver, which we'll get into shortly.
Right.
But some of his titles that he's responsible for are Mugen Senshi Release 2, Ground Seed, which we did an episode on, Slayers, Totsugeki Mix, Virgin Dreams, and I think just about all the Princess Maker games, as well as Princess Maker 2, which is known for its soundtracks.
Yeah, it's a very awesome soundtrack, actually.
Yeah.
Should do an episode on that someday.
Oh, yeah, that would be cool. And those were all for the PC-88/98. He also did the Telnet Music Box for the X68000. There was Silent Mobius for the PC-98 and X68000. There's Rusty, which has a huge fan base for its music.
Such a good soundtrack, along with Kenichi Arakawa and Yu Takami for that.
Oh, yeah. But really, he's got at least 200 game compositions and arrangements for systems like Dreamcast, Windows, PS2, PSP, Nintendo DS, and he's contributed to a bunch of the Dojin music discs.
Right. He also did a track for 8-Bit Music Power, which was this NES music cartridge that came out this year in 2016 by Columbus Circle. You basically pop it in your Famicom or your NES, I think if you have a top-loading NES, it'll work. And you just kind of go into this menu. I think they have some simple games. I'd probably have to ask Ed about it. He actually has the disc, or the cartridge. But he did a track called Oriental Mystique, and it's really cool. It's really interesting. So
it's such a cool project.
Yeah. Now, Kajihara has done a bunch of pretty well-known titles for the Japanese PC market, but there's a reason why we chose this game, and not just because of the kick-ass music.
Right. Kajihara not only composed the soundtrack for this game, but he also did all the design and programming as well.
Right.
And since we're going to have him on the show in a little bit, we thought this might be a little bit more of a personal game for him.
I think so. Anyways, let's get into our next track. This is from the OPNA version again. This is titled VGM 1 from Hole Chaser, and we'll be right back.
That was BGM 1, composed by Masahiro Kajihara for Hole Chaser on the PC-88.
Yep, and that is using the YM2608 sound hardware. This track, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the Super Sentai, kind of like those Japanese old, Power Ranger-like.
Yeah.
Or I guess Power Rangers is like that, but
yeah.
You know what I mean, right? It kind of reminds me of like a theme song or like a battle track from... I don't know. That was the first thing that popped into my head.
No, I can totally see that. I mean, it's fast paced and it has like these dynamic drums, and the track is kind of always like it feels free flowing and continuously moving. Love like the synthy guitars and stuff like that. It's so good. And that fade out towards the end, I thought that was so cool. It was like such a nice touch that, if you were to listen to the track on loop, it would feel really cool.
Yeah, it would just go right back into it. No, I like it's a very Japanese sound to me, and it's like, how do you define that, right? But like when I listen to video game music and you hear these very sustained kind of melodies, and as they trail out, you get this like almost like a scale or some kind of sequence of notes that leads you right back into the next part of the song. So it's like da 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 da, and it's just like, that just to me sounds really like 80s Japanese, kind of video game music, or like that Sentai music,
Yeah, and for me, when I hear like kind of like rock music that's kind of fun and kind of bright, that reminds me of Japanese culture very much. Like for us here, when I hear rock and roll music, it's usually like darker, or maybe not as happy. Like it's at least like
more grungy,
or melancholy or something like that. And when I hear like that really bright, colorful rock and roll music, I definitely think Japanese.
Yeah. Anyways, we haven't really talked about the PC-88 hardware much, and kind of its history, because we've done shows on PC-98. We've played tracks from the PC-88, but we haven't really focused on a single game yet. And this is a good opportunity for us to kind of talk about the hardware.
So to kind of explain it real quick, NEC released the PC-8801 in November of 1981.
We weren't even born yet.
Yeah, close, but yeah.
Not quite.
Yeah. This was the successor to the PC-8000 and was widely used in businesses and really paved the way for NEC's dominance in the Japanese PC industry in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, the PC-8801, or better known as the PC-88, had a 4 megahertz processor and a 640 by 200 pixel 8-color display. However, the biggest selling point was its backwards compatibility with the PC-8000 series software. So it made it like a really smooth transition for people to upgrade that had already been using the software for work, or had kind of already invested in the NEC ecosystem.
Now, this wasn't originally meant to be a gaming machine, but over the course of its lifespan, with all these new hardware additions and upgrades, it became quite a capable little machine.
Yeah.
The original model, though, only had beeper sound and was actually pretty basic.
Yeah, there were a few other revisions after that, but nothing really significant until 1985.
Which we were born.
Yeah, we were alive then. Maybe that's why it's significant. When NEC released the 8801 MK2 SR, which is a mouthful, and not only gave it a major facelift for the kind of graphics department with the V2 mode, but it also gave the machine some audio love with a built-in YM2203 OPN chip. And this model is really what kind of repositioned, it from being a business-only kind of product to more of like this hobbyist and gamer kind of machine.
Right. And we've talked about the OPN chips several times before, but
I can't even count.
Yeah. So a real quick recap in case you forgot. The YM2203 OPN was used in a bunch of arcades and computers in the 80s and 90s. It has 3 FM channels with 4 ops per channel and 3 PSG channels, basically because of the implementation of the YM2149F.
Right.
So basically it has 3 FM and 3 PSG channels.
God, you have good memory.
I'm getting better at this.
There. That's awesome. Anyways, it seems pretty simple, just the 3 FM and the 3 PSG, but this chip is actually pretty capable, and there's a lot of really cool music made for it. And I think that the more we listen to the soundtrack, we'll see that, the OPNA stuff is really awesome, but there's a lot of really sweet little gems in the OPN side.
Yeah, it's definitely not overshadowed totally by the OPNA. So let's play a track using the 2203. This is Hole Chaser BGM 2.
That was BGM 2, composed by Masahiro Kajihara for Hole Chaser on the PC-88.
Yeah, see, that was still really cool.
That was awesome.
Yeah, I loved it. It was simpler, but still really awesome. Really cool percussion. And I love that slide flute at the end. It's like, like it just reminded me as a kid, like walking around being obnoxious playing with one of those.
Yeah, what I like about this track too is it's got that really dirty lead. That it's almost like it's shrill.
Yeah, I thought it was very kind of like piercing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, me too.
It's like FM synth masterpiece to me.
Yeah,
it's just really cool. And to go back to what you were saying about the percussion line, it's interesting because He could have done all the percussion on the PSG, and he decided not to, and he put the bass over on the FM side of things.
Right.
And so you have the PSG playing. Well, why don't we go ahead and play that real quick? See, so you got that really heavy bass.
Yeah.
And then on the PSG side, let's just turn off the bass real quick. It's just the hi-hats and the or the rim shots or whatever you want to call it, and the snare itself.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like when we realized that he broke it up that way, and it gave that feeling of a really dynamic percussion line, which we know that the OPNA has such amazing percussion.
Right.
And then for the OPN to use the chip to its fullest capabilities, doing it like this was cool.
Yeah. Let's get into another 2203 track. This is VGM 5, and we'll be right back.
You just heard BGM 5, composed by Masahiro Kajihara for Hole Chaser on the PC-88 with the OPN.
Yeah, this track is really cool because in the beginning, it has this really kind of frantic menu-driven sound to me. It's almost like you're selecting your ship or something like that. You can't do that in this game, but
yeah,
it's almost has that feel to me. But when the PSG kind of picks up and it gets really bright, and it still has that kind of chaotic back end.
Right.
I think it's a really interesting kind of put together piece.
Yeah, it's definitely really, really unique. I thought with the way this track starts out, it's like super drum heavy. It's like all drums really rapid, right in your face.
And then that bass guitar is like,
and then that higher end comes in and takes over, and then that's what you notice more in this track, I think, than like the drum and bass line. But they're both really cool. Like what's going on in both sections of the song, I think, are just really interesting.
Is that something we should take a listen to?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be cool to break this one apart.
All right, so the drums in this, I think, are all on the FM. Oh man, that's cool.
Yeah. I just thought I could hear it through all the high-end stuff going on. I was like, oh man, this thing is like going crazy.
Yeah. It kind of brings me to another point because, we're talking about in the last track how he used the, hats and the snare on one of the PSG channels.
Right.
But in this, it's a little bit different. He moves the percussion completely over and the bass over to the FM side and leaves the PSG for those kind of kind of twinkly little lead or melody sections.
Right.
You want to hear that?
Yeah, and we were talking about that earlier, and then when we switched it, we were like, oh, wow, this is really interesting and cool, too.
Right. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's very kind of haunting. Wow.
So pretty.
Yeah. And it's funny how both sets, the FM and the PSG, both of them by themselves are really pretty cool, and they both get really crazy. And then when you mix them together, it's just like really, really intense.
Yeah, it just goes to show that the 2203, it's not as capable as the 2608, but it has so much. There's really so much you can do with it.
Yeah, there's so much to love.
Yeah, there's so much to love, and there's a lot of really cool music composed for the chip. So I think it's good that we put both versions in here because I think that the soundtrack, it would be missing if we didn't have both ends.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, back to the evolution of the PC-88. We left off in 1985.
That was shortly after our births.
Yes, and that was like the next big kind of change in the actual hardware and what NEC was producing. And as time progressed, a few more CPU revisions were done. Then the biggest change, and really the most important one to us, was the 8801 FA in 1987, because this contained a major audio improvement, bumping the 2203 chip up to the YM2608 or OPNA.
Yeah, but this didn't mean that you had to buy a whole new system to get the OPNA audio. Older models could be upgraded to the 2608 by an expansion board called the Soundboard 2.
Yeah, and I think it was a pretty popular option for people to do it that way. A lot of software that I would see when I was loading it up in the emulator and stuff will say like, Soundboard 2 audio or loading Soundboard 2 driver and stuff like that. And I think that for a lot of people, they already had these in their homes.
Right.
A lot of engineers were already working on them. So why don't just buy the soundboard expansion and you're set.
Right. I mean, it sounded like this system was already popular enough, so creating like a little addition part was really nice.
Right,
so,
right.
I mean, the system had some other revisions and upgrades since then, but
Right.
I mean, we've kind of covered what is important to us by this point. So
Yeah. So the 2608, and I've said it before on the show, this is probably my favorite sound chip.
Right.
And we've also talked about it pretty frequently. I think we're this show, we tend to focus on PC-98 stuff a little more than just naturally comes to us, right?
Yeah, because we did that whole teardown with the ground seed episode, but there were other stuff like Snatcher on the PC-88, like I said, ground seed, and Popful Mail, all for the PC-98, and just tons more stuff.
Right. I mean, that was the sound chip of choice for the PC-98. We talked about that. It had the same kind of progression. It started with a beeper, and then it moved to 2203, and then it eventually landed on the OPNA, and that's where all of this amazing music is kind of finding its grounds. However, as a refresher, the YM2608 is a 16-channel FM chip based on the 2203. It has 6 FM channels, 3 PSG channels. It still retains that YM2149F functionality. And it also has a rhythm sound source, and which is and we've talked about this before on the show, has 6 channels of ADPCM that are kind of baked into the ROM.
Yeah, and this is for the bass drum, snare, rim shot, and all that other stuff.
Right. And it also has 1 ADPCM channel that uses compressed 8-bit samples. It's just an awesome chip.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love it, and you love it, and I hope you listeners love it. But so with that, let's jump into our next track using the 2608, and the track is BGM 2. All right, that was BGM 2, composed by Masahiro Kajihara. This track gave me a Konami feel right off the bat with all those orchestra hits. I was like, man, am I listening to like Turtles or something? But I thought it was really cool. You can see the drums sound a little more real. You can almost hear like what it would sound like for a drumstick to be hitting on the top.
Yeah.
And then it had a little bit more of a sadder emotional feel to it than I thought some of the other songs in the OPN side had, which I thought was really neat to me because I like that feeling.
Right. I think that the lead was a lot more graceful. You know, when we compare this to VGM 2 that we played earlier on the OPN, they're very different tracks.
Yeah. Completely different.
And that's why, you know, we thought, we should play pretty much everything, both versions, because they are so different. You can kind of hear little tiny, I guess, callbacks to the other version,
right? Or
reverse, however he composed them, whatever order he composed them in. But I think that they just sound so completely different to the ear than to the naked ear that you know, it is kind of interesting to listen to both sides. Yeah.
Oh man, and like you were saying with those leads, like the trailing synthy keyboard or whatever was just so cool. I mean, this track, like I said, had such an emotional quality to it compared to the OPN side, which that alone made it feel so completely different. Even if the melody and all that was the same, it would have felt completely different.
Yeah. Well, now, you know, he can put everything on the rhythm sound source and utilize all 6 FM channels rather than just, you know, have to kind of splice it up and make the track feel a little bit, I guess, not as full. But, you know, on the OPNA, he can really just focus on the FM channels completely on its own. And I think that maybe kind of leads to the different timbres and the different emotional qualities that we're getting from the track.
Right. I mean, no, that's a good point, because with the OPN side, everything is, you know, it's very chiptune, it's harsh, like the sounds don't trail the same way, they don't blend as much, where if you listen to the OPNA side, like everything kind of blends and smoother and feels more full. Yeah.
Anyways, let's get into our next track. This is BGM 5, and this is also using the YM2608.
That was BGM 5, composed by Masahiro Kajihara for Hole Chaser on the PC-88 using the OPNA.
You know, this sounds like a late 80s rock song.
Yeah.
I think it's due to the percussion line. It's got that really driving, like, doom, ta, doom, ta, doom. I don't know. The guitars, that FM guitar really... It just has an 80s rock vibe.
Yeah.
You know?
No, the whole thing I think does. It felt a little simpler through most of the song. It wasn't like going crazy over the top. There was little really energetic, crazy parts that were peppered in. But I love the opening to this one. It felt like the beginning to like an 80s movie or something. It was just like, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But then parts of the song kind of felt like a boss track to me. Okay. Like there were some very kind of menacing parts towards the middle, and then the later half of the song kind of got a little bit more menacing, I felt. It was really cool, though. I really liked it.
Yeah, I like that guitar solo at the end. It was so chaotic. It was like blah, 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 all over the place. But the other thing, too, is that he's very aware of that. He knows his hardware, like backwards and forwards. And the PSG plays this really neat supporting role in the track, and you can hear it really well. But what I kind of want to talk about is the percussion line, because we were listening to it together, and we thought like, oh man, the percussion sounds a little bit different from the normal OPNA rhythm sound source that we know and love. What's going on with that? So we kind of listened, and we realized that the percussion, that bass and the snare, all occur on the 80 PCM channel, on that sampling channel. And so because it has a little bit of a reverb to it. Do you want to hear that?
Yeah.
Well, real quick, actually, this is just a PCM by itself, just the rhythm sound source. So it's just kind of like that, those hats, and then I guess that's like a clap or a rim shot or something like that. And then you get the 80 PCM, so it's really adds the breath, I think. So we'll solo that out real quick.
Yeah, I was saying earlier how it definitely sounds like you're in the room and you can hear like the fullness of that kick drum part. It was really cool.
Yeah, it's that kind of echoey reverb, like a live performance kind of feel.
Yeah.
Definitely knows how to make use of that.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, what's really interesting is this track, and I kind of wanted to bring this up earlier, but I forgot. A lot of this music was actually part of the music discs that Yokosu's sound team was making in their their music volumes. And I think this track actually shows up in Volume 3.
Right.
And there's a few others in Volume 3 as well. But then Hole Chaser somehow kind of fits between the release of Disc 3 and I want to say Disc 4.
Right, you were telling me that.
Yeah, because, I'm looking at the music disc and kind of his composer notes on the track. And I noticed these tracks were in the game. But in Disc 4, he actually has titles for them. He says, this is Hole Chaser opening theme. This is, background 5 or whatever. And so it must be in that window when he was like, okay, I think I'm going to use some of those tracks, and now that it's in an actual commercial product, I'm just going to call it by its new,
right,
influence.
Like in Disc 3, he was still working on them. He's like, oh, these are cool tracks, I want to share them. And then in Disc 4, he's like, I actually put those into a game, so now I'm going to actually put the titles in from that game. So
and kind of talk about why.
Yeah.
Anyways, so let's talk about this game a little bit, because it's really interesting.
Yeah, we'll keep it to a minimum.
Yeah, so Hole Chaser is kind of a simple action game where you have to guide an extremely frustrating UFO to exit a course. And it bounces off hazards in the stage. It's not going to kill you, but it will kind of make you ping pong around like a pachinko machine or something like that. But there is a strict time limit for each stage, and it runs out really quickly.
Right.
And that will kill you. So if you don't get through the exit in time, it's game over.
Yeah, so I can see why you can say it's frustrating.
Oh, I was so pissed off playing this game. Anyways, we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah. Okay, so the story starts off interesting enough, but it gets weird really fast. So the main character of the game is a guy called Daisuke, and one day his girlfriend Kasumi asks him if he would write music to accompany the lyrics that she wrote for a song. And like most of us who would do just about anything for our partners to keep them happy, he says sure, and spends about 3 days working really hard on this song. And eventually he finishes it and rushes over to her house because he's excited to play it for her. But when he gets there, her dad says she isn't home yet. And shortly after that, you find out that she's been kidnapped, and instead of involving the authorities like you would in the real world, her father decides to help Daisuke by giving him this small ship or UFO of some kind.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, see, I told you it got really weird towards the end. I liked the beginning. I thought it was kind of neat, like a boyfriend, girlfriend, he's helping her out, but then it's just really spirals really quickly.
Yeah. See, now if this were my daughter, I would be, cracking skulls. I would be going out there myself. I wouldn't send some, dipshit boyfriend out to go handle business. I certainly wouldn't give him my UFO.
Yeah, I mean, and why does he have this weird little UFO just sitting around? It's not like that's a normal mode of transportation, it seems like, in this world. So
it's so weird. So in this game, when you beat a level, you see this short scene of Kasumi, and the thing that kind of bothers me is she's being sexually assaulted by her captor, and I lived over in Japan. I know that they have things are kind of more socially acceptable. Not that, sexual assault is any form of, acceptance there, but like I see kind of, they have games like this that are kind of a little bit risky and a little bit, and it was more popular in the 80s, but yeah, that wouldn't fly over here.
Yeah, and one of the things is that it gets more explicit as the game progresses. So I mean, it's kind of messed up. We're not really fans of the game, and
not at all.
We're definitely not promoting sexual violence towards women at all. So, just to be clear on that. But just to wrap up on the gameplay, there's 6 stages in total, and there's a music mode where you can listen to all the VGM, which we always like that in games where you can just kind of sit there and listen to everything. So, really, you can kind of forget that there's an actual game part to this.
Yeah, it's not important at all. But going back to the VGM mode, Yokusui Software was making all of these music discs, right?
Right.
And so for them, what was important? Well, obviously the music. So it seems like a very conscious choice to have a VGM mode in there where you can go and listen to the music kind of separate from the game. Because honestly, I don't know if this game sold at all. Not that it didn't sell well. It probably didn't sell much at all.
Right.
So, I don't know. The graphics wise, explicit scenes aside, I think that the art is actually well done.
Yeah, it definitely had a beautiful, like manga art style to the cutscenes that were, very detailed, beautiful colors. We know that the system could handle a lot of cool stuff like that. But then the gameplay was a very stark contrast compared to the beautiful, detailed art illustrations. Yeah.
I think because Kajihara did the programming, he wasn't really like a game designer. Mm-hmm. He was more of just like an engineer. Like he could do the back end stuff. And I think this is kind of like, this game it's a playable game. It's a frustrating game. It's hard.
Right.
But somebody else did all the artwork for it. So, I could see the kind of contrast between the gameplay and versus the cutscenes.
Yeah. And like programming a level with a lot of detail, I'm sure is much harder than programming cutscenes to play. So the idea of being like a sphere flying around that you have a little bit of control and bouncing off of things and still trying to make it in a certain, path in a certain time limit. That's kind of an interesting game. I think it could have had a better look, and then maybe just rip the story out altogether and just make it like an arcade type,
like a little puzzle game.
Yeah, like there's no point to a story. Just get in there, get to the end, and that's the whole thing.
Yeah, the story is completely. Really, what it comes down to is it's not that Yokusui Software was making these games because they had this perversion. They were making it because they wanted to sell to those people who will pay to see.
Right, there's a market for just about everything.
Yeah, so I mean that's that is kind of the key selling point. It's not the game.
And like you said, this was a lot more prevalent in the 80s and stuff like that. I think there was a little bit looser rules, and I don't see, there's still games like this being made, but I don't think in the numbers that we saw back in the 80s.
Yeah, and it was a PC game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that it was a PC, it wasn't like a home console. You didn't have like Nintendo or Sega or Sony or something like really kind of pushing their finger down. This is kind of like distributed however they wanted, I guess. What's interesting about this game, though, is it seems to be the commercial version of a Dojin game that Yokusui Software did a little bit earlier. In fact, 1989, it came out. It's called Nukeru Master XX Pro 8.8K. And we had talked about this earlier.
Right,
They had done this title. And I was playing it because I was curious about Yokusui Software, and so I was going through all of their titles, and I noticed this game, and it really stood out to me. So I sent you a screenshot.
Yeah,
I was like, "Hey, do you notice anything about this game?"
Yeah, and it looks so much like the Hole Chaser that I was like, "Oh, it's just like a blue level." It looks exactly. I mean, it looks exactly like the first level, except for it's blue. So I thought, oh, maybe there's like the colors change. I hadn't played the game yet, so I didn't know what was going on. So I wasn't really aware of what you meant by does this look familiar, and I was like, it looks like we're
doing this episode. No, the music is totally different, but the game itself, the actual gameplay, is like identical. It's like pretty much the exact same game wrapped up. And I think when they made this, they were thinking like, okay, we're just going to throw it out there online or BBSs or however distribute this. And then when they got kind of this idea of making commercial product, they're like, you know what, we already have this. Why don't we just usher in, make a story around it, and kind of put it out there for the public.
Yeah, and that Nukeru Master XX and the XX Pro 8.8K, it's still an adult game.
Yeah, it says for adult on the title.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there you go. Anyways, we're going to play some more music. We have 2 tracks. These are both BGM 3 But the first one is going to be from the YM2203, and then we're going to play the YM2608.
You just heard BGM 3, both from the YM2203 and the YM2608, composed by Masahiro Kajihara for Hole Chaser on the PC-88.
That first track is very stoic, very hard-hitting, very disruptive, and just very driving. And I think that what I like about this track, and I really like this track, is the fact that it has that really tenuto sound that just wants to... It feels like it just wants to break something, and it's just so strong and powerful. But then it kicks into this kind of cool, like, jingle later on, maybe like 30 seconds, 40 seconds in. I like that.
Yeah, no, I thought it was very frantic, and it had like this, not necessarily like disjointed, but there were like parts where everything seemed like they weren't working together, and then the high end and the low end would come together and start working together again, which I thought was kind of neat. It gave it like this disjointed kind of feel to me, but in a good way, not in a bad way. And it also gave me a little bit of like a Castlevania vibe to like the middle part. Both of these tracks actually did, but I thought this one did. If you like re-listen to it, I got a little bit of a Castlevania vibe.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. Castlevania, maybe not like that kind of classical Baroque kind of sound.
Oh, right. Like almost like a remixed version of it or something.
More like a boss battle in that Castlevania, stratosphere or something.
Yeah, it was more of like the melody. It seemed a little bit like stretched out, and obviously a different sound, like an overall sound to it, but the melody to me, I was like, wait a minute, this kind of reminds me of something, and then I kind of got it, I think.
Yeah. So BGM 3 on the OPNA, this track for me, I didn't get a Castlevania vibe as much as I got a Chippendales Rescue Ranger vibe.
I still got a little bit of a Castlevania from this one, but I thought this was really cool. Right from the start, it's very full. I like the xylophone-ish sound to the beginning. I was like, wow, that is really cool. It's such a neat sound.
I was going to say the same thing. I love it. It's like almost like little guy on a hammer dulcimer or something like that.
Yeah.
Or some, guitar or something. I don't know. It's awesome.
Yeah, I thought it was very cool. Great percussion, awesome variety to the song. It was really enjoyable. Yeah. Still very driving, but it had like a mellower or like a more somber overtone to the whole thing, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of driving, why don't we talk about this driver?
Okay.
A little bit. You like that transition?
Yeah.
All right. So what do we got?
So Masahiro Kajihara programmed all the music for this game using his professional music driver, or PMD, and this driver was heavily used in Japanese computer systems in the 80s all the way through the 90s.
Yeah. What this driver does is it allows you to write music or sound effects for an FM sound source using MML, or music macro language. And I say FM sound source because the driver was also cross-platform. So like PC-88, the 98, Sharp X68000, FM Towns, and also the IBM PC.
Yeah, and there were a few other versions he wrote for different platforms.
Right. So PMD, MML, is made up of a few key components. We're not going to get into like the whole structure of the driver on this episode, but you can look at these key components and kind of get an idea. There's the preprocessor for macros and meta. There's FM tone data, macro definitions, and then song sequence data. And this kind of all together creates, after you compile it, will create the audio for the game you're doing. PMD had a bunch of different updates and revisions, but the last one, or the last version that was released for the PC-98 was the version 4.80. And I believe this was released somewhere in 1997, but the documentation's a little bit unclear.
And was this game using PMD 2.0? Or?
This was actually using version 2.5.
Oh, okay.
So I think it was a little bit matured at this point. You know, I think early on the music discs that they were working on, I think they started with version 2.0.
Okay.
In disc 1. And then, over time with minor updates or major updates, we got to kind of this version. So I think it's a very mature state.
Yeah, it seems like it was somewhere in the middle-ish area.
Yeah, and this software works just like any other kind of driver. So it's basically like a DOS TSR where it'll load up in the beginning of the game, and then it uses a system call to give control back over to the OS. So kind of like it's quit, the application's not running anymore, and it stays alive in system memory to be called by a software interrupt. And really just like any other hardware driver, except that this one is specifically targeting the FM chips.
Yeah.
So, the driver's really interesting, very widely used.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll get him to talk a little bit more about it when we have him on
and
later.
I think its wide use is one of the most interesting things about this. But let's get into some more music. Like our last block, we're going to play the same tracks from both the OPN and the OPNA. So we have VGM 4.
All right, you just heard BGM4 from both the YM2203 and the YM2608, composed by Masahiro Kajihara for Hole Chaser.
Both those tracks are awesome.
Really awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
That first one, it's, harsher, a little more shrill, very chiptune, and I love that. But it was just so crazy. And that part more towards the end where it gets, or I guess it's more in the middle, where it gets super fast and everything's hitting so quickly. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, that
was really insane.
It's very intense. The next track, I really like the beginning. It sounds like meow, meow,
yeah.
meow, meow, meow. And when it picks up, though, I mean, God, you can't help but love that bass guitar. Oh my God, it's so good.
It's nuts. And it's such a well placed, like it's all over the place, but it's so well composed. And I really like there's that note that comes in that is just like, wah, and it like comes in like and just stays there. And I was like, but it feels like it arrives, like it gets closer and then it just stays there. I was like, wow, that's really cool. I like that, how it's just going off and it just trails off kind of quickly and then comes back again. I thought that was kind of neat. While all the drums and percussion are going crazy and the leads. And towards the end, there was also that like solo jam. I thought was really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I think for me, the star is really that bass line. Oh, it's so good. I mean, we don't even need to solo it, but I think we should anyway.
Yeah, I think so too.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of interesting actually. I thought this was a single channel at first. So I was kind of surprised to find out that it was actually, that's 2 channels.
Oh,
it's
cool.
2 FM channels. One is a little bit softer and kind of a little more brash. And then the other one is a little bit more open. And but they're playing the exact same notes, so it sounds like one. I don't know. One really almost live instrument because it has such a unique tone through 2 different channels.
Yeah, that's what I was noticing was that I didn't realize it was on 2 different channels, and I thought that the tone of it was different because it kind of sounds like more tinny or wood block like you know, like when you see people on the street playing, you know, drumsticks on like PVC barrels or something. Like it has a different sound to it, and I thought it was really interesting. I didn't notice that until we separated it out. That how different and tinny or wood block it kind of sounded.
Yeah, it sounds like a bass guitar played with like a pick.
Yeah.
You know, like normally is, you know, fingered, but this is like really you can hear the pick scraping on the individual strings. It kind of has that vibe to it. Anyways, I think it's time that we bring on our guest.
Yeah.
I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, me too.
You were just like, we were so nervous because Sky he's so important to us, and just it's really awesome that we're having him on. So we've been talking about the music, playing pretty much everything in the soundtrack at this point. Thank you so much for joining in today, and we're so excited to be able to talk with you.
はじめまして、梶原です。よろしくお願いします。
All right, so let's get started. Our first question is, what inspired you to become interested in both programming and composing? Did you originally want to be just a composer, and then the programming part kind of happened?
ですね、もともとはプログラムをやっていました。で、ゲームを作っていて BGM をつけたいと思ったので曲を作り始めたという流れですね。
All right, so he says, I first started off as a programmer, but then I got interested in games and kind of started making my own. And then he thought to himself, he said, you know, I made this game. I really should add some background music in here. Otherwise, it's not really a game.
So I guess on that note, how would you define your musical style?
そうですね。ジャンルは特に何か決めたものはないんですけれども、特にメロディーを重視して作ることを心がけてやっています。メロディーが、しっかり頭に残るものというのを、特に考えて作ってますね。はい。
So he says, I don't really think I could put a label on my style. I guess I just put my heart into it and really try to create a melody that will stay in the player's head.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see melodies being very important. We've talked to other composers where melodies were really pretty key. So where would you say that your musical inspiration comes from?
そうですね。僕が中学校ぐらいの時の、ゲームセンターのゲーム、ナムコやコナミとかの音楽ですね。そこからだと思います。それ以外ですと 生演奏でしかできないようなジャンル、フュージョンやらクラシックとかですね、その辺にちょっと憧れがあって、それを打ち込みでなんとか再現できないかと頑張ってた時期もあります。そのあたりが影響を受けてると思いますね。はい。
So he says, I'm sure that most of my inspiration comes from games that I played in the arcades during middle school, Namco titles, Konami, and so on. But other than that, I'd say a lot comes from different types of jazz, classical, or fusion. That type of music really touched me, and whether I could actually do that through computer music or not was something that I really wanted to try to accomplish.
Wow, that's cool. A nice challenge to bring something new.
Kind of moving on to talk about the driver a little bit, because this is, we talked about it earlier. It's so widely used and you're very well known for this PMD driver. Could you kind of tell us how PMD got started and why you actually wanted to create this driver in the first place?
もともと PC-88 で同人ソフトでですね、上玉作のスプリットという音楽ドライバーがありまして、それを、使っていたんですけれども、まだその機能とかまだそれほど多くなくて LFO とかがなかったんですねそれでそういうのを追加したいということで、だったら自分で作った方がいいだろうっていうことで始めたものですね。はい。
それはかっこいいと思います。Yeah, so he says originally there was a sound source driver for the PC-88 called Split, and it was created by Kamitama. Kamitama-san でしょ？
上玉さんです。
はい、Kamitama. And so he used that basically to create music originally. But then he thought to himself, this would be so much better if it had, more functions. It was just so limited.
Right.
Stuff like LFO was missing. Just these common functions that he really needed to create the work that he wanted to do. So he thought, I guess I'm just going to have to make this myself.
Yeah, if no one else is doing it, you got to do it yourself.
Yeah.
But to build on that, like you mentioned, we talked about the PMD driver earlier, and we know that it went through a few different updates in the software as it was refined. What sort of enhancements were made to the driver?
まず同人ソフト即売会というのが当時はですね、パソケットっていう名前でしたかね。ほとんど1ヶ月に1回ぐらいはあったんですよ。それにもう毎回参加してまして、それでまたあとネットワークですね、東京 BBS というネットワーク上に公開していて、それで、バグレポートやら追加の要望を聞いていくうちにどんどん改良されていったという感じです。はい。
So he says, well, I used to attend these Dojin software meetups called Pasoket, which stands for Personal Computer Software Market. And also I got a lot of feedback on the driver from various groups and others using the driver on a network called Tokyo BBS. I kind of used this as like a bug report system, and people would also put up feature requests and kind of stuff like that. And so this is how a lot of the ideas or updates came to be. It was based on those recommendations from others.
That's pretty cool to get such community feedback at an early point like this. That's really neat.
Early 90s. I mean, the internet wasn't even
a
thing really, so
and you got all these people all over the place like giving you feedback on how to make this driver as amazing as it ended up being.
Right.
So now I feel like I have to ask, was there an enhancement that you were most proud of?
そうですね。最初から同人ソフトが最初なんですけれども、ゲームに組み込む用のものとして作られたものなので、最初から効果音が鳴らせたり、負荷が軽い演奏中にあんまり遅くならないということですね。そういうのがもうゲーム用として開発されているものですね。それがポイントだったと思います。
So he says that from the start, the driver was really just meant to be used in Dojin software. And through its kind of progression, it started getting used in mainstream games and, people started using it. And what he was really proud of was the fact that it kind of ran under the hood, very lightweight, and it didn't slow down the games at all.
それから、PC-98 時代になってから、FM 音源の3チャンネル目を4つのパートまで、最大ですね、4つのパートまで分けてパート分け演奏できるという機能が、 特徴的だったと思います。
Yeah, and so from a compositional standpoint, specifically from the PC-88 moving forward, when you're using the chip's sound effects mode in conjunction with a function called FM3CH, the slots are divided independently to allow 4 different parts. And he said that that was a very, very useful feature, and he's very proud of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just the functionality of this driver was just insane. So I could see being really, really proud of that and how useful it was.
Yeah, and what this is kind of doing is it's splitting up channels that you have and it's giving you extras. And so that's something that it's very hacky, but it's a really cool feature.
It's really clever,
yeah. All right, so this is kind of like a multi-part question here. But when and how did you first get involved in the music disc scene? Because we've been talking about some music discs and it kind of sparked our interest in doing a little mini series on music discs.
Yeah.
Could you explain how the Ryokusui sound team kind of started, how it began? And how did the members of RST communicate and send data to one another?
はい、ですね、音楽を作り始めたのはその最初に話したゲームに BGM をつけたいというところなんですけれども、最初に高校の時のパソコン研究部という部活動ですね、そこでゲームを作っていたんですが、そこで自分の作ったゲームに音楽をつける。
So he says, kind of going back to when he was talking about creating music for a game he'd been working on, he was part of a programming club in his high school and wanted to create that, background music for his game.
当時は機種が MZ1500 でしたね。SSG ですね。はい。それに曲を作ってました。それから始まってますね。その後にゲームセンター、で知り合った友達たちですね。が緑水サウンドチームに後々なっていきます。それで、そこのボスのノアさんですね、NOR さんの家にみんなで集まって作っていたので、まあ大体そこでやり取りはしていました。はい。
Yeah, so at that time he was with a small group called SSG, and then he moved over from there over to the Ryokusui sound team.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, and so he says as far as how RST began, he said they all met at an arcade. It's no longer there anymore, but it was called Namco's Play City Carrot.
That's so cool.
Yeah, in Shinjuku, and he said there he met Nor. We had talked about earlier, Nor Master, who was the leader of Ryokusui Software, and all the other members of the group. And they would all kind of get together and go over to Nor's house, and they would kind of hang out and continue to work on programs. So he said, in fact, pretty much all of the work that they did on their games or their music discs was made at his place.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just, don't tell your mom and just go upstairs and, hey, what are you kids doing up there? Oh, we're making music discs.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
I guess there's other things you could be doing that would be worse.
So I'm actually curious, how did you sell these music discs?
現在はされてますけど、当時はその同人ソフト、先ほど言いましたパソケットですね。そこで販売していたものですね。
Oh, it was mostly at those Pasoket markets that he was talking about earlier. They would kind of exchange things and either sell their software there and however they're going to distribute.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like a little marketplace. Okay, so we know that you have this huge, very impressive library of music on the PC-88. What system limitations or capabilities of that system were you most intrigued by?
そうですね。とにかく FM 音源ですね。88SR から出たサウンドボードからの、FM 音源が一番特徴的で、こんな音が鳴るんだ、すごいっていうふうに思ったことが、そうですね。なんか素晴らしいとこだったと思います。
All right, so he says, first of all, the thing he loved about the PC-88 in general was just the fact that it had FM synth.
Yeah.
He's like, when he first heard it, he was like, oh my God, this is awesome.
I think that's for a lot of people.
Yeah, and then also the fact that a lot of games were using the FM synth. They were taking advantage of the sound hardware, and that's just mind-blowing because at that time, really early on in, when the PC-88, came out. We had talked about this earlier. There was only beeper sound and stuff. So as soon as these new models were introduced, and you got the 2203, and then later you get the OPNA, it's just overwhelming if all you heard is a beeper.
もともとあとその前に PC-8001 PC-8001 ですね。それを使っていて、それのソフトウェアを使えるということで、最初は買ったものですね。それもいい点だったと思います。そうですね。あまり悪いところというのは思いつかないんですけれども、まあゲームをプログラムをする上でやっぱりちょっとグラフィックを取り扱うのがちょっと遅いというところはありました。
So he says that, really the fact that the PC-88 was backwards compatible with all the PC-8000 series software, that was a major selling point. And
I could totally see that.
Yeah, and a really big feature for him because he started with the PC-8000 series and kind of moved forward. So after, upgrading to the next hardware, he was able to still use all of that old software. And he says that there's not really anything major that he didn't like about the system. But maybe from like a programming perspective, the system wasn't very fast at drawing graphics.
Oh, okay.
But that was just something they had to deal with. So,
yeah, a limitation of the time.
Yep. What are you going to do? All right. So let's real quick listen to a track from Hole Chaser. This is VGM 6, and we will be right back. 懐かしいですか？
懐かしいですね。すごい。はい。
You just heard BGM 6, composed by Masahiro Kajihara for Hole Chaser on the PC-88.
Yep, and that was using the OPNA hardware.
Yeah.
This is my favorite track in the game.
Yeah, it's
I love it.
Excellent track.
Yeah.
I love the really strong drums, but the whole track feels very delicate. There's a lot of subtle volume changes, great variety, light little touches that I think make this track feel really cool with the really strong drums and then this really softness to it.
Right. For me, it's that snare is so powerful, and then again the bass line just it's out of control.
Yeah,
it's just it's like it wants to be unleashed. It's just got a lot of power, but then you get this really kind of floaty, delicate high end that I think balances the whole track out. It doesn't make it too overwhelming. Doesn't make it too chaotic.
Yeah.
Kajihara, can you kind of give us your thoughts and opinions on this track?
BGM6 ですか。そうですね。まあベースについてはやっぱりその最初の方に話しました、フュージョンというものがとにかく生ベース、チョッパーベースですね、そのあたりの弾いてる人たちをリスペクトしてもってどうにかこうかっこいいベースを作れないかということを考えて、当時いましたね。それとあとギターもそうですよね。ギターもちょっとその曲はクリーンなギターの音が入ってますけど、それもなんとなくそれっぽいものをという意識で作りましたね。
All right, so he says that he kind of approached it by he wrote this when he was 18.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. And he says that kind of going back to what he was saying earlier about wanting to incorporate a kind of genre that didn't really work so well on the computer. Right. He started off with a bass, and he had a lot of respect for jazz musicians, that really kind of raw sound. And then on top of that, he added this really kind of clean guitar, and the two contrasting sounds kind of accentuate each other and give a little bit more raw feeling. And I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it turned out to be an excellent track.
All right, so yeah, let's go back and talk about Hole Chaser a little bit. So one of the reasons why we chose to spotlight this, aside from the obvious, the amazing soundtrack, is the fact that you did all of the programming and design. And Hole Chaser's game design appears to have kind of evolved from an earlier Ryokusui game called Nukeru Master. Could you kind of elaborate on this for us?
はい。ですね、最初に入ったソフトハウスが日本テレネットという会社で、そこでバリス2とかの音楽を担当していたんですが、その後に辞めてフリーランスになったんですが、そこでそこの同じく日本テレネットを辞めた人たちが作ったバーディーソフトというそのホールチェイサーの開発会社ですね。そこの人からスカウトされて、プログラムと音楽をやるようになったんですが、当時まだゲームデザイナーさんがあまりいなかったので、何か、出せるものはないかと聞かれたので、その前の年に、そのパソケットで売っていたその抜けるマスターをこれを市販化して絵をつけて市販化してみようっていうそんな流れで作りました。はい。
All right, so yeah, he says, I started at Nihon Telenet and I was doing sound there. And after quitting, I decided to go into freelance for a while. And then Birdiesoft, the publisher of Hole Chaser, which was a company based on a bunch of ex-Telenet guys, they scouted me to do music and programming for some of their software. The thing is, though, they didn't have a game designer, at all. At all.
You kind of need one of those.
Yeah, you kind of need one. So they asked me if I had done anything that wasn't commercially available yet. And I said, there's this game called Nukeru Master that I've been kind of selling at swap meets and stuff. Yeah. And the guys said to him, well, why don't we just try that and see what happens?
It's like, sold. This is our next game. It's already done.
なので、似ているというか、ほとんどプログラムに関してはほとんど同じものですね。はい。
He says, so you could say it's similar, I guess, but it's really just the exact same game.
Yeah, I think we picked up on that. Maybe a different color, but...
Right. New facelift.
Yeah. Okay, so in this episode, we've been talking about the music from both the OPN and the OPNA sound systems. Aside from the hardware differences, could you explain your approach to making music in both these different versions?
当時は、PC-88 も98もそうですけれども、OPN が基本でしたので、先にそれ用ということで作ってそれに対して音を追加していく肉付けしていくという形で OPNA バージョンを作るということが多かったんですね。がなんか趣味で作るような時は OPNA 専用みたいというような作り方もしていました。それについては OPN 版は作らないという前提で最初からPCM を使ったりリズムを使ったりというので作っていましたね。はい。
All right. So he says when the PC-98 came out, OPN was still kind of the main sound source. It was the main one used. So his thoughts were to kind of stick with that being, the OPN sound source. And at that time, OPN music was good enough because it was still melody focused.
Right.
And it had to be this way simply because of the limitations and the limited channels you had. So it's like if you can imagine OPN as kind of the bones of like a skeleton, OPNA would be like the flesh and the skin for the rest of the sound.
Oh, okay. That's a cool way to look at it.
And so he said, of course, it doesn't mean that I always root, music for the OPN. It's not how he always started. There would be certain like PCM samples that he'd really want to use right from the start. And, obviously you can only do that with the OPNA. So that was kind of his take on it.
Oh yeah, that's a really neat way to look at it. I guess I never thought of it like that. So how they can kind of work together a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because we had talked about this. OPN was kind of like the thing for so long, and you got these different models and makes of computers that come out, and OPNA really just kind of hit the end, and that's where things totally took off. But prior to that, all these systems were out with just that OPN sound source.
Right.
Yeah.
Earlier in the episode, I mentioned how you have just a ton of amazing music. Is there a soundtrack that you personally like that you've made, and why is that?
ですね、ホールチェイサーの中だと、ステージ3の曲ですね。なぜかというと、やっぱメロディーがしっかり何を聴かせたいかというのが、ガツンと芯が通っているというところですね。
So he says, now if we're talking about Hole Chaser, and I listened to the whole soundtrack, I'd say that BGM 3 is his total favorite. And he said, I wanted the player to kind of hear this melody. The melody is kind of the same, or rather the theme of the game, but I was able to take a much different approach to that track, and that's why I liked it.
That's cool.
But I'm kind of curious, not just Hole Chaser, Hole Chaser aside, out of all the stuff that you've worked on.
Yeah, all the different albums.
Yeah, what would be your favorite?
一番好きなサウンド、どうだろうな。僕の作ったものでですね、全部の中ですね。全部の中、なんだろうな。
I think we kind of put him on the spot.
Yeah, I could see it being pretty difficult to pick, from all the amazing soundtracks he's done, just to pick one.
そうですね、もう一番最近になっちゃうんですけど、一番好きかと言われるとわからないんですけど、トリガーハートエグゼリカを結構気に入ってます。
Yeah, so he's like, oh man, I have no idea. Like, how do you say what your favorite thing is that you've made? I guess it's hard. But he does say, the last thing that he was kind of interested in, he was really proud of, was Triggerheart Exelica. And I guess he just really liked that soundtrack.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we're kind of curious about something here. There's an album coming out called Tribute to Ryu Umemoto that's going to be released in November this year. And it seems like you've arranged a track for it called Kizuna, or Bonds. Were you close to Umemoto-san? What was it like for you to kind of work on this tribute album for him?
梅ちゃんがですね、その PMD を作っていた時代にもうほとんどうちに住んでましたっていうか、一緒に暮らしてました。そういうそれでお互い音楽を作って刺激し合っていた仲ですので、すごく仲が良かったと、言っていいと思うんですが。
So he says, I used to call him Ume-chan, but yeah, he was one of my closest friends at the time, and he would come over to my place a lot while we were working on projects. We were really, really close, and he would stay for long periods of time.
そうですね。PMD の機能も梅ちゃんに言われて作ったものっていうものが本当にいっぱいあってですね。それで、もういろいろ感謝をすごくしているんで、ツイートアルバム出るとなるともう参加しないといけないっていうもう使命感みたいなものですね。それで参加しました。
All right, so he says, they spent just a ton of time, like all of their time at work, all of their free time even was spent together. And he said that Umemoto has some really, really good ideas for adding functions to PMD. And those ideas are largely what shaped the driver and what it kind of turned out to be.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
And with that, he said, I didn't even have to think twice about wanting to be part of this tribute album for him because, for me, I was so close, it wasn't even an option.
Right.
It was just, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Umemoto is so important to us as fans,
right?
And to be able to talk to somebody who's very close to him is it's a good feeling.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we have a few more questions.
Yeah, so it seems like you're still actively composing a lot of music. So what kind of projects are you working on, or what can we expect to see from you in the future?
日常的にやっているものは、現在まだフリーランスなんですが、アトリエピーチという音楽制作事務所というものがありまして、だいたいゲームの音楽、音声全般をやっているところなんですが、そこでスタジオで収録、音声収録、音声編集、スタジオ管理、そのあたりやっています。で、今作曲についてはその梅ちゃんのツイートアルバムもそうですけれども、古くからの知人から依頼されて曲を作るということが非常に多くて、今も、そうですね、その流れで今スマートフォン向けのアプリの VGM を作ってます。
Alright, so he says, right now he's a freelancer doing sound editing, voices, music, effects, stuff like that, for a game called Atelier Peach, which is taking up pretty much all of his time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he says he's not actively looking for composing jobs. Sometimes old friends and coworkers will ask him to do some work here and there, but lately the tribute album to Umemoto has been kind of, I guess, his recent passion. He's also doing a mobile game, but since it's still in development and hasn't been announced yet, he can't really say too much about it.
That's understandable.
Yeah. So we just want to say, thank you, Mr. Kajihara, so much for taking the time to, chat with us today, tell us about your history, the PMD driver, all of the music of, Hole Chaser stuff you're working on. I had a blast.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've been so excited to talk to you. So.
Yeah.
こちらこそありがとうございました。本当楽しかったです。
ありがとうございます。He said, I had a good time too. All right. Thank you so much.
はい、じゃあ失礼します。
All right, so to wrap things up, today we covered Hole Chaser on the PC-8801, composed by Masahiro Kajihara. And we also listened to the music from both the OPN and the OPNA.
Right. If you want to know more about the show, you can check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for show notes and track lists. We can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Pixelated Audio.
Yes, and if you guys would be so kind as to leave a comment, give us a review on iTunes, that would be awesome. If you want to give us some ideas to change things up, those comments are always welcome. So you can email us right through the website, or just give us a review. It's always awesome.
Which we have a new one from Canada, right?
Yeah, so we want to give a shout out to Game Brew from Canada. He left us a really nice review. I guess he does a website called gamebrew.io. He mentioned in his comment here that helps promote indie developers and stuff, and he said as he was working, he was listening to our show, and it was kind of a nice accompaniment to his work. So
you might find some cool indie stuff over there, so you might want to check it out. If you're new to our show, you can check out past episodes like Ground Seed, which we mentioned earlier from the PC-88 by the same composer. We had also Illusion Blaze and our debut of Virtual Boy with Red Alarm.
Yes. I'm proud of all those episodes.
Yeah, they each have their different aspect that made them a unique episode, which is cool.
Ground Seed, it feels like it's been forever. I think that was episode 47.
Something like that, yeah. That was a long time ago.
What an all-star cast. I mean, Umemoto, we had Takami, we had, just all these awesome composers all kind of thrown in. So
and we got to feel like we kind of brought it over here, since there was absolutely no information almost online anywhere,
like in English,
in English or even in Japanese. So
and we also dug into the OPNA hardware a lot more as well, and the PC-98 hardware. So kind of fun episode. I urge you to go back and check that out. Anyways, want to kind of bring up our charity events just a few days away.
Yeah. So like you said, a few days away on November 5th, it's Extra Life, where we raise money for Children's Hospital by playing video games for 24 hours straight.
Yeah, it's this marathon that basically, we get kind of donations from friends, family, hopefully some of you guys, you feeling generous. And we just kind of play games for 24 hours. And, at the end, we pretty much just fall asleep for 24 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really great cause, and all of the money, all of the proceeds go directly to the Children's Hospital.
Yeah, you donate online through their website, which is great. We don't have to deal with any of the money or anything like that.
Yeah, we don't touch anything.
Yeah. And we've been doing this for years, so it's really exciting for us. It's something that's important. We're going to be streaming the event, so you can check in and say hi. And, we're going to be recording a special Extra Life episode like we did last year that will be recorded over the course of those 24 hours, so you can hear how groggy and tired we get over the course of the night.
That was fun. I mean, last year was a blast.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a lot of fun this year. And, the other thing is, I think we're going to stream. I think we're planning to stream this episode live as the parts come in. So if you see us on, Periscope or maybe Google Hangouts, maybe we'll have it live streaming there or something. If you want to just come in for one of our music breaks or something, you can see us doing the show and how messed up we end up getting. Anyways, it's fun. It's for a totally great cause. All right, so the track taking us out is the ending theme from the OPNA version of Hole Chaser. And this is an awesome track. It's a lot of fun to listen to. It's very happy, bouncy. I think you guys are going to like it. Thank you guys so much for listening. And, be sure to check our feed in the next few weeks for the next episode.